Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Prati Kothari, and I am thrilled to be your host today as we explore artificial intelligence in bioinformatics in the 32nd session of the Student Journal Club organized by BioPractify and partners. This is a fantastic opportunity for us to learn and grow together. Artificial intelligence is transforming the field of bioinformatics by enhancing data analysis, interpretation, and decision making processes. This integration is particularly significant due to the vast amounts of biological data generated in genomics, proteomics, and related fields. Before we dive into further discussion, I would like to take a moment to introduce our esteemed speaker, Mr. Vijay Balsubramaniam, who is a final year undergraduate student at IIT Bombay and an incoming quantitative developer in the risk analytics team at the Bank of New York. His primary area of work has been reinforcement learning, which is a form of artificial intelligence inspired by the idea of feedback based learning of intelligent agents. He also has professional experience in deploying machine learning applications for sentiment analysis and entity recognition in the finance domain. He has also worked with the Proteomics Lab at IIT Bombay to develop a generalizable data analysis pipeline for the study of differential gene expression in meningioma tumors. Today, Sir will share his insights on unraveling artificial intelligence in bioinformatics. Participants, we encourage you to participate by typing your questions into the chat box throughout the session. With that said, I request Mr. Vijay, sir, to commence with today's session.
Namaste everyone. I hope my screen is visible and I'm audible. Could someone confirm that? Yes.
Yes,
All
sir.
right. So let's start with today's talk. So a lot of word has been going around these days regarding. I'm audible, right? Yeah. All right. So artificial intelligence seems to be a word that is on everyone's tongue and it is being applied everywhere. So before I even begin with the first slide, I just want to say this that there are a lot of misconceptions around what artificial intelligence is, and there are a lot of cases where people tend to hype it much more than what it actually is. So even before I start, I would like to tell you that the primary goal of what I am trying to achieve by sharing this presentation with you is to show you that it is not really that complicated. It does have its complexities, it does have its nuances, but artificial intelligence itself is not something that people cannot understand or that it is not interpretable. And in particular, in the field of bioinformatics, artificial intelligence has been growing over the past few years, and that's what we are going to explore today. So, as I start, let me introduce myself. I thank the host for introducing me already, but just to add on to a few things over there. So, more, as she already said, most of my work has been in reinforcement learning, and during our presentation, I'll probably be introducing it to you in very short. And my work has been as a quantitative developer in Bank of New York. So you would have guessed from my description that I'm sorry, is there an issue with the audio? Am I not audible? Is there an echo?
No, it's clearly audible. I think the participants, you can try to rejoin or maybe refresh your audio, like this meeting. Vijay, from your end, the audio is completely okay.
All right. Thank you so much for that clarification. So you would have guessed from my description that there is not much in particular. Sorry. All right. I guess that was just an error. So, right. My background is mostly in quantitative development and deploying machine learning models for finance-based solutions, basically software solutions. And I am a computer science engineering student at IIT Bombay. My background in bioinformatics is limited to the work that I have done with the proteomics lab. And so you would realize that the perspective from which I am going to come today is from the perspective of a computer scientist, a software engineer, but also trying to share it in a way that you can relate from no matter what background you are from. And this is because as we grow and artificial intelligence becomes indispensable to what we are doing, no matter our field, there are going to be a lot of interdisciplinary exchanges. So I feel that it's also going to be really valuable for me to give you a software engineering perspective of what this is, even though for 90% of what I'm going to talk today, the general perspective will be pretty straightforward. And for a lot of our conversations, we'll be treating artificial intelligence as a black box. All right. So let me give you an overview. For the first few minutes, I'll be talking about why artificial intelligence is being talked about everywhere. And once we settle that question, we are going to deal with what artificial intelligence actually is. Do we actually need to worry about it so much as people are saying? And then we'll take a look at artificial intelligence in bioinformatics. And because I have a background in working on the analysis of meningeal tumors, in particular the RNA-seq data that comes from that side of tumors, I will talk about that and the application of machine learning techniques over there. Machine learning, in case if you're not sure, is a subset of artificial intelligence, and I'll define that very shortly. And finally, before I conclude and give you the takeaways, I would share with you where this field is going with artificial intelligence, and even in general, where AI is going to take us before I conclude the session. All right. So why is artificial intelligence such a big thing, and why is everyone talking about it these days? That is the first question that we are going to try to answer. Right. So I'm not going to start from very afar. I'm going to start from a very relatable place. It is a newspaper, right? The newspaper has a lot of articles about artificial intelligence. If you look at this specific slide, the headlines that I have chosen are all from the last 2 weeks. In particular, they are from the date around August 25th, 23rd, and 24th. So, in the world in which we are living, artificial intelligence is something that generates news every day. So, it is not unlikely that people want to talk about it all the time. And even if you look at these three headlines, all three of the applications of artificial intelligence that the headlines are talking about are in pretty different places. If you look at the very top of this slide, there is this graph from Google Ngrams. Basically, what this graph is showing is the use of the word artificial intelligence, this term, over the following years. What is the percentage use of this word in the set of books, Google books that Google has available in its repository? And unsurprisingly, this thing has been going up steadily over the last decade. And why is this happening? Because we are generating news every day. There are self-driving cars, and even yesterday, Tesla has announced that they are going to showcase their first ever self-driving cars. And there are companies in India even which are launching software that analyze the device on which the software is installed, and using the parameters of that specific device, it will be able to identify whether the hardware has been rigged so that you can do some malicious activity on apps. So this is what Experian has brought into the field in the name of Adrian. And of course, Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, these are companies who are very active in the field of AI development, and they have come up with something called the Phi 3.5 series, which is basically an artificial intelligence agent, which is very light in terms of the current day agents. And what that agent does is it is nothing but a language model. It is used for analyzing words, reading text, that kind of work. So hopefully you would have understood that news is being made every day. Now imagine if this is the news that has been generated only over the past few days. The amount of news and the amount of development in this field that must have been done over the past decade, not to even mention the last half century that has passed, must be humongous. So there is a need for us to understand why there is such a big boom in this field. And every one of us has heard about this thing called ChatGPT, but there are so many things out there, right? ChatGPT is one language model which has been developed by OpenAI, and almost all of us have touched it at some part of our life or the other. Then there is Gemini, which does something very similar. It is nothing but a collection of AI models that Google has come up with for DeepMind, and what and it is also a multi-purpose model. What they are going to do is answer questions, analyze sentiment of texts, those kind of things. Then you have DALI, which is for image generation. If you give it a prompt, it is going to generate an image. Some of you must have already used something very similar to DALI, which is there in Microsoft's Copilot, which you would have seen if you are a frequent user of Bing. If you give a prompt, it is going to generate an image based on what text you give it. Then there is this thing called Claude AI, which is another AI assistant. And Alexa is also an assistant that analyzes what you say, and it's going to give you results based on what you asked. Socratic is something that a few of you may have heard. It is much more popular in the Western countries where people can just scan an image of their homework problem, and Socratic is going to help them solve it by first reading in the problem, converting it into symbols, and then actually converting that image that it received using character recognition and turn it into something solvable, something that has to be, you know, done so that some output can be generated. So there are a lot of AI models out there that are being used for daily purposes. And this is not something that only specialized people or experts can use, but the 7 logos that are present on this page are things that people are using every day, even those who have absolutely no idea of what AI actually is under the sheets. Now we have a much more pertinent question. Where does artificial intelligence come in? So, in the field of education, as I have already given you an example, there is Socratic, there is Gemini, there is Copilot, there is GPT. These are all things that people are using in education every day. Artificial intelligence is going to stay there in that field for a while. Then, if we take a look at healthcare, there are a lot of things that artificial intelligence brings in. We'll see even today in my talk about drug discovery, personalized medicine, patient care, and diagnostics, and even how it is improving prognostics with good and reliable accuracy. Then comes the field of finance, and I've added it not only because it is very relatable to me, but in general because the world tends to treat those things which appear in the world of finance as to have received some kind of reliability or legitimacy. Because finance and medicine are two fields where it is very expensive to make a mistake. And so, if a new technology is being brought into healthcare and finance, there is already a good deal of trust that people have started to place in that idea or concept. So the fact that artificial intelligence is shining in this field already means that it is reliable in many ways, but it does have its shortcomings, as we'll see later. Then there is manufacturing and e-commerce. So how is it coming in manufacturing? Basically, process optimization and controlling the parameters that are related to manufacturing. There are things that Google is doing using AI. It is controlling the amount of power its cooling stations are using. So Google has these huge data centers and they are filled with hardware that keep getting heated, and the cooling that is required by these data centers is humongous. Google uses artificial intelligence systems to control how the cooling of these data centers is done, and they are saving more than 30% of the energy they would have used if they were not using such controlling methods. In e-commerce, there is also AI because there is recommendation systems that are based on artificial intelligence. Based on your previous search history, AI is going to recommend new things to you. Then there is transportation because there are apps like Ola and Uber who are also going to use the recommendation system side of AI to show that AI shines in transportation system. Then there are many more things because I have already showed you that there is image generation, there is a lot of content creation related things. We have virtual influencers these days. So artificial intelligence is there everywhere. Now let's go to the second part of what I want to present. Hopefully, I have convinced you that artificial intelligence is already everywhere. There is a lot of word going around about what it is, what it might be. And so it is the need of the hour for us to understand what it actually really is under the hood. So I won't go into any deep math here. I just want to keep it really brief. But this section is has been added by me just so that I can give you a brief idea of what in general AI means. Okay. So the basic question that AI is asking is what is intelligence? Right? Intelligence is the basic ability of humans to reason. We look at something and we begin reasoning about it. So there are a lot of words in this diagram. I don't want you to absorb the entire diagram together, but focus on one thing at a time. So reasoning is the core part of what we define as intelligence, right? And the utility of this reasoning comes in the form of the interaction that we as intelligent agents make with our environment. So, for example, if I want to get up from my seat and walk, I need to interact with the environment and decide on how I should move my muscles, my joints, my connections. And this comes from the learning that I have had in my past while growing up, learning how to walk, interacting with the things that I see. There is a door over here, there may be a table over here. So, how do I walk there without colliding? This comes not only from my previous experience, from my previous learning, but the world knowledge memory that I have. And it is based on this learning, this world knowledge memory, which I have from my previous experiences, and the perception that I have right now of my current situation. I take in these two things, I do a bit of reasoning, and based on that reasoning, I am going to take an action. Instead of an action, it is going to be an interaction if I get more learning from the environment based on what action I take. So, this is the general high level view of what intelligence itself is. And how did this idea of intelligence develop? So, unsurprisingly, the idea of intelligence, even in the field of computer science and engineering, has taken inspiration from neuroscience and, in particular, psychology. So, the age of early AI in 1950s, 1970s was just focused on symbolic reasoning. The core focus of that system was just the reasoning part of this. Then around the 1980s, you had something called as knowledge-based systems. And these things were focused on the world knowledge memory part of it, where you give the system knowledge ready-made in the format and you just expect it to do reasoning based on that knowledge. Then you have the era of machine learning, which came between the 90s and the 2000s. And this is where we actually started interacting with data and started reducing intelligence into mathematical abstractions. And this is where we are going now. Intelligence ultimately boils down just to a mathematical function. This is the key takeaway from today's session. So, even though you don't have to understand what kind of mathematical function AI really is, because you might just be the end user of it, what you need to know is that underlying all the glamour that AI brings, all the glamour that machine learning brings, all that it really is a mathematical function. And it is an attempt at biomimicry in the sense that the people who came up with the idea of perceptron, which was Rosenblatt, if I'm not wrong, he himself was inspired by the concept of the biological neuron, and he draws this mathematical function called the perceptron as an analogy to the biological neuron. And what he's saying here is that the input signals that you give to this perceptron, which are nothing but numbers, everything you see on this side, the left side of the slide, are just numbers. So all these inputs that you are feeding into the system are equivalent to the inputs that a neuron is just going to receive from its dendrite, right? And these weights which are present over here, these are equivalent to the synaptic weights which are coming from the axons of the previous neuron. And that is being absorbed by this dendrite, which is taking that input from there. Then there is an action of summation, which is something similar to what the cell body is doing in a neuron. And finally, you're going to send this out with an activation. After processing this input, the weighted input that you received, you are going to check whether the processed output that this transfer function, in analogy with this cell body, sent out crosses a certain threshold. And if it crosses that certain threshold, it is in that case that the action is going to fire, or this activation function is going to fire and send out the output. So the entire concept of this mathematical function, if you are daunted by the idea of math itself, is nothing but a numerical form of the neuron as a biological unit. So the next time somebody talks about perceptrons or neurons in the sense of artificial intelligence, you really just have to imagine that it is a mathematically reduced form of the biological neuron. And so what we are going to, what the machine learning engineers do is arrange a bunch of neurons. So all of these circles that you see over here, these are nothing but neurons, or these are nothing but this perceptron in one form or the other. And the inputs and the outputs that you feed to this function, this mathematical function, are nothing but numbers. So you are going to feed in an image of a cat, let's say. You want to see whether the image is that of a cat or a dog. So the output is going to say 1 if it is a cat, and it's going to say 0 if it is a dog. Let's imagine this is the mathematical function that you want to model. The input you're going to give is a set of numbers. Now, what is it going to be? So maybe this cat is an image, and the image is made up of colors, right? Every pixel has a certain color. So you encode each one of those pixels as a numerical value, and you're going to feed that numerical value over here. Now, the perceptrons over here are going to have weights, these weights. It is these weights or these parameters that are going to be tuned in such a way that based on the pixel values that you get from here, these parameters will automatically fire in the correct way, so that in the last layer, the perceptron over here is going to output 1, saying that yes, this is an image of a cat. If instead you fed in an image of a dog, it may have come out with the output 0. So the neural network as it is, or the deep learning that we say as it is just a mathematical function that is inspired by the biological neuron put together. And these functions take a lot of forms. There are a lot of machine learning paradigms that come out from here. One of them is reinforcement learning, which says that there is an intelligent agent, and that intelligent agent is in continuous interaction with an environment. Given a state, it is going to take an action, and that environment is going to give a feedback and going to say, let's say that the agent is a robot that is trying to, play a game of cards. And if it made a bad decision in the game of cards, it is going to receive a negative reward. It's going to lose the money. So the agent will remember, okay, I lost money. I should not do this thing when I am in the same situation again. So I will not take the same action when I am in this state again. I will take a different action. This paradigm of learning is reinforcement learning. Then there are other forms of learning. There are these expert knowledge systems, which are just knowledge transfer from an actual human expert, and that is translated into a knowledge base, which is usually in the form of a knowledge graph, and that may be used to develop a network or train a certain automaton that is basically just going to look into this knowledge base and answer a question that a user may ask to this artificial expert. Then there is natural language processing. Most of the AI agents that you may have used in everyday life are these natural language processing agents. So Chat GPT, Gemini, most of these are these NLP pipelines. They are just going to look at text information, do a huge amount of data processing, and then interpret the result of whatever the machine learning algorithm gave out in the form of numbers. Then you have image processing, computer vision, which basically looks at an image using a sensory device. Most often these are cameras. We will come again over here in the context of magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, which we'll discuss today. And then there are very simple machine learning techniques such as trees. And these trees are basically just going to look at all the parameters that you feed, and they are going to make binary decisions. Okay, so is the age of this person less than 18? Then the weight of the person matters. Is the weight too much? If the weight is too much, then they are highly susceptible to the risk of a heart attack. These kind of trees are also automatically developed based on the data that you feed into these systems. Now, how do these mathematical functions actually learn? How are the weights of these neurons, this weight, these weights in particular, how are the values of these weights determined? That should be the topic of discussion for another talk. But for now, let us just assume that there are methods for training which are based on complex calculus and backpropagation methods, using which we can actually just feed in a lot of data and tell the agent this is the output that I want based on this data, and those weights are going to take the right or at least the best possible values that those weights can. This is the hope that we have from machine learning. And now we move on to the core part of today's talk, which is the relevance of artificial intelligence in bioinformatics. Now, before I move ahead, I just want to take any questions that we have so far. So if any of you have questions on the general gist of what I said about the mathematical formulation of the problem, anything like that. All right. So I guess there seem to be no questions. I think we can move on to the next part of our session. So now we want to focus on what artificial intelligence is doing exactly in bioinformatics. Having convinced you that artificial intelligence is already there in so many different fields, it is now um, my attempt to convince you that in bioinformatics in particular, what is artificial intelligence doing? So first of all, let me just bring us all on the same page on what bioinformatics is. For today's talk, it is all right. I think there is a question. There is AI data center cooling. All right. So this is something that has come up over the past few years. And so, okay, first of all, what a data center is, right? Data centers have a lot of CPUs that are running. So all of the queries that you give to maybe some of you have used Google Colab, maybe, and almost all of us are using Google Drive, right? Now, whatever that we are storing on Google Drive is actually being stored physically on some hardware object. There are some transistors somewhere out there. Sorry. Okay, if there is anything, could you just type it on the chat? It was not clearly audible to me. Right. So what I was saying is there are actual hardware manifestations of where this information is being stored. So Google essentially has these data centers where a lot of these hardware devices, basically they are hard disks. You may have seen hard disks. It's also there in our laptop. There are solid state drives. So there are a lot of drives like this that Google has in an actual building, and they have huge gigantic chambers which are nothing but the servers, CPUs, and hardware devices kept over there. And because there is so much hardware running, and because there are so many queries, so much load balancing, so many things that that one data center has to do, because all the queries are coming from all the parts of the world, the hardware devices there are getting heated up. And so what you want to do is to cool that data center. You want to keep the temperature low enough, because all transistors have a limit on how heated they can get. You need to maintain a thermal equilibrium within that chamber. So what you need to do is have a good cooling system for that data center. Now, in general, what you may do is let me just switch on the AC all the time and just go away. I will keep the AC at, let's say, 10 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees Celsius, let the data center devices keep running. I am not going to bother about it the entire day. But this is not really the case, right? There might be times when the activity of that hardware is much higher and the heating effect is much higher. In cases like that, you want to cool much more. And more significantly, there may be periods of relaxation where there is not sufficient requirement for cooling. So in that particular case, you might want to reduce the cooling that is being done in the system. That is going to help you save energy. So what Google is doing is it is keeping a track of how much the workload on these hardware devices within a specific chamber is. And based on that query processing capacity or the live traffic that is present on that particular hardware unit, it is going to decide what amount of cooling is going to be required. So the data that they have is basically the parameter of how much traffic is there, what is the current temperature of the room, how many of these hardware devices are active, what is the threshold temperature that each of these hardware devices can take. Based on this, the cooling system that they have is something dynamic. It is not going to always be 10 degrees Celsius. It is going to dynamically increase or decrease to maybe 5 degrees or maybe 15 degrees based on how much cooling is required. And using this technique, Google seems to have reported last year that they are saving around 30% of the energy cost that would be required if they were using a very stereotypical brain dead technique of just cooling it all the time with the same intensity. This is what I was referring to back then. Coming back to where I was, bioinformatics for this talk is the science of collecting and analyzing complex biological data, in particular genetic codes. And AI is excelling at this because we want to automate prediction. And we feel that there are things that the mathematical functions can see, which we ourselves cannot, because we don't really learn in that fashion. And the most important thing is that there is a large amount of data to be analyzed, and it is really computers that excel in processing so much data simultaneously in a short span of time in comparison to us, because we have limited attention spans and we cannot pass gigabytes and terabytes of data every day and have memory of all of that all the time. So there are a lot of artificial techniques in bioinformatics, and in particular, there are three web pages whose screenshot I have put on this page. These are all open source web pages, by the way, and these are open for all of us to go and see. Some of the software that Keystone Map has is, of course, paid. So what are the AI techniques? So natural language processing is something that I already told you. It is so one of the techniques that we use in bioinformatics is that we want to find out what biomarkers are relevant to a disease. Now, there is already a huge corpus of research papers that, let's say, exists on a disease like Parkinson's disease. And I want to find out the biomarkers that may have been mentioned as significant in many of these research papers. I do not have the time to go through 300 or 350 different research papers and come up with saying, okay, this particular biomarker has been mentioned in all of those research papers, so definitely there is something significant about them. I want to use something like ChatGPT or Gemini that is going to help me by reading all these hundreds and thousands of papers and come up with saying that, okay, this specific biomarker has appeared more than 50 times or more than 100 times in the context of Parkinson's disease. So maybe you should consider this as significant in whatever analysis you're going to do next. That is finding mentions of biomarker. Then there is suggestions for intelligent drug purposing. So what this Keystone Map website is doing, they also use natural language processing techniques, and they go through a large amount of patents, articles, and publicly available data, in particular what you have in NCBI, and they come up with actionable insights. They are going to tell you these are the drugs that we have identified from this particular set of articles as being possible or being relevant to this particular situation. And this initiative is also something that is basically trying to drive action from the data that is publicly available on the internet. Gene ontology resource is something that is has been used by many of the people who have been associated with biology, not just bioinformatics. And what that website is basically a knowledge base, right? And they are listing the functions of genes, and a lot of um, analysis of what a function of a specific gene is can also be done using artificial intelligence. And with passing days, they are increasingly trying to incorporate this use of artificial intelligence into gene ontology. And given a huge sequence which is just ATGC in different orders, you want to classify that sequence in different fashions. And we will come to this again when I take the specific case of meningioma. Computer vision. So protein structure pathology. AlphaFold is a protein structure database. This is an initiative by Google DeepMind. What they have done is collected a huge amount of protein structures, and they have created a tool for visualization and image recognition techniques so that we can take a look at the actual physical structure of the protein. It may not be the actual exact physical structure of the protein, but based on the previous knowledge and existing protein structures we have, the artificial intelligence system that AlphaFold has within itself is going to predict the likeliest protein structure that it can come up with. And this is something that is useful for histopathological purposes. Now you can imagine that these things would not have been possible without computers. And not just without computers, what artificial intelligence is bringing in over here is that it has already analyzed a huge amount of data. A huge amount of proteins have already been studied, a huge amount of samples of data have already been processed in short spans of times. Even a 2 to 3 day continuous processing or machine learning framework designed to go through terabytes of data is something that is practically humanly impossible for us to do with the bandwidth of our intelligence. So now let me go in particular into each one of these things. So in the case of genomics, there is this thing called deep variant. So what is the purpose of deep variant? It is basically there to detect the genetic variants, which are basically single nucleotide polymorphisms from raw sequencing data. And these genetic variants are changes in the DNA sequence. Now, how is this system working? So basically, I see that someone has raised their hand. I will get back to you in a short while, uh, just after I finish this section. Sorry to keep you waiting. So it is just going to take in the input data, the raw sequencing data, and it is going to convert the DNA sequence that it has available into an image. And this transformation into an image allows the next stage, which is an artificial intelligence agent. That artificial intelligence agent, which is a convolutional neural network, it will analyze these images. And what is this neural network trained on? So first of all, when I use a word called convolutional neural network, you don't have to think much about it. It is just a mathematical function whose parameters are already trained. It is just going to take in the input, which is this image, this pile up of image that has already been created from the visualization engine that they have. And it is just going to identify the patterns that it sees in these images. And it is going to predict, it is going to take a look at the predicted variants that have come up from this visualization tool. And it is going to give a confidence of how likely it is that each one of these is a predicted variant. This is deep variant for you. There is another use of artificial intelligence in genomics. So CRISPR is something that people have been talking about a lot for this past 2 decades. And machine learning has also entered this field. So I have just taken a screenshot of what I got from this paper so that it directly impresses you that AI has made it into mainstream research in bioinformatics. And what they are saying here is that most of us know that the relevance of this Cas9 nucleus is in the form of the DNA scissors. And a lot of the unintended off targets of this cutting action can be avoided if we use certain machine learning techniques. And this main challenge is there to maximize this on target activity of this CRISPR and Cas9 protein, and that is being done using artificial intelligence, where they are redirecting the agent to the right part. So what is artificial intelligence doing? It is enhancing the precision and safety of this CRISPR gene editing by predicting the off-target effects. And this leads to a more effective gene therapy. So these two are case studies of where artificial intelligence is in genomics. The next thing that we have is drug discovery. So one of the things that we are doing every day is virtual screening. Again, these three things, deep chem, atom-wise, benevolent AI, these are things that you should go and look up after this talk if you have the time and interest. And even during the time of the pandemic, it became very relevant on how these things were coming up. So there are techniques and tools to screen chemical compounds based on the requirements of what kind of target molecule it is that you want to attack. This is where deep chem comes in. This is where virtual screening is being done for millions of molecules together to come up with a new chemical compound that you might believe has some effect as a drug. Then there is predictive modeling. As we have already seen, there are things that are showing you protein structures. Atomwise is something that analyzes these 3D structures and it predicts the binding affinity of these chemical molecules to those structures based on that structure. So this is where the artificial intelligence of how that structure, protein structure actually looks comes into the picture. And then there is this field of drug repurposing where benevolent AI has, during the COVID-19 um, pandemic, come up with this idea of repurposing baricitinib, which was already used as a drug for other diseases, as a drug, potential drug for COVID-19. This was done using artificial intelligence, again using ideas to predict the binding affinity of these molecules. Now there is precision medicine. So precision medicine is something that has only recently come up during the years. So people have realized increasingly that as we go on, individual patients have different susceptibilities to different diseases based on their genetic structure. And this is where artificial intelligence is scoring people based on their genetic structures to show how likely they are to get a specific disease. Not only that, we want to see whether a specific drug that is being given to a patient has more effect on them based on their genetic structure. So does a specific regimen suit them more? And is their genetic makeup such that it makes one drug better for them than the other? So there are prognostic implications here. There are also effectiveness implications of how good a certain medicine regime might be. All these things show up in the field of precision medicine, and artificial intelligence is helping us by showing what kind, based on the data that is already available, what kind of patterns are present in this data, what kind of patterns it sees in these genes, which seem to show how likely a certain patient is. So for us, just looking at these sequences or just looking at these ATCG alphabets, which are written for us on a piece of paper, we are not going to be able to make much of an interpretation. But based on the numbers that come from differential gene expression analysis or those long data analysis pipelines that bioinformatics people have developed, the artificial intelligence agent has mathematical basis to predict the side effects of drugs and the implications of how well a drug can work on specific people. Now, before I move on to the next section, which is the specific case study of artificial intelligence in meningioma, I see that there is a question. What are the risks associated with the use of artificial intelligence in bioinformatics? So towards the end, I will come back to this part where I will talk about the limitations of artificial intelligence. But just to touch upon that over here before I move ahead. So one major issue with artificial intelligence is that because we are talking about it as a mathematical function, when you ask for a given input, this artificial intelligence agent said, अगर input A दिया तो उसके लिए I will do output B. What is the underlying logic for this? that is purely in the form of these weights and parameters that is encoded in that neural network. As a human, there is no way for me to interpret what those numbers actually mean. So even though I have a very reliable system, let's say I have a system which has 97% accuracy on certain data set, let's say with 97% accuracy, it is going to tell you based on an MRI image whether this patient has meningioma or not. I still have no way of knowing why, based on this image, that neural network has said that yes, this is the case of a meningeal tumor, and I think this is a grade 1 meningioma. So there is no way of us interpreting what those numbers actually mean. How does this translate into a risk? If tomorrow someone comes to me and asks me what uh, kind of reasoning is there for how do you actually interpret this MRI image, there is no way for me to actually tell. And if after 10,000 new MRI images come, the artificial intelligence agent might just change its mind. It might just retrain its parameters based on these new images to say that, okay, the mathematical weights that I had set last time were actually based on limited information. And so the 97% accuracy that you were actually seeing was basically just because there was a data bias which was inherent in that data set on which you trained me. And so the 97% accuracy was actually just eyewash. Risks like these are actually always there, and people in the field of bioinformatics are developing new techniques in building larger corpuses of data every day so that we can combat this risk of non-interpretability of these machine learning agents. So yes, that is one of the risks. I will touch upon this more later. So I would now take the specific case of how artificial intelligence is working in the battle against meningioma. So what is meningioma? It is a brain tumor that comes in the meninges, and in the fight against the central nervous system tumors, meningioma, the non-malignant meningioma, seems to be the most significantly occurring brain tumor. And in general, WHO has a classification of meningioma in this form as grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3. And these grade 3 are the worrisome meningiomas. Now, what we as bioinformatics or as students of medicine or just data scientists or machine learning engineers or just humans in general are interested is that grade 1 meningiomas are benign. Maybe we don't even need to treat those tumors. Now, how do I know when I have detected a tumor that this tumor is going to worsen or develop worse or malignant symptoms over time? And how do I know whether I can actually just leave it without actually treating it? This is one of the questions that you may have. Another question is, even if I remove this tumor, what is the probability that this tumor is going to recur? These are the questions that come up time and again in the context of meningioma. Now, let me give you a review of two of the latest papers that has come up in the context of machine learning in meningioma in 2023 and 2021. So one of this is the development of a convolutional neural network, which claims that it has 98.63% average accuracy. So what this thing does is that if you give it an MRI image, it is going to come up with an output of telling you whether this image corresponds to a pituitary tumor, it corresponds to a glioma, or whether it corresponds to a meningioma. If you see this image on the right side, it is an architectural display of what this intelligence agent, this mathematical function or this AI agent is actually built up of. If you don't want to concentrate on all of this, the general structure that you want to focus on is that it outputs finally whether the MRI image that you gave it was pituitary, glioma, or meningioma based. And this technique that these authors have come up with is something that is cheaper and faster than all the existing machine learning models that we have out there to classify these MRI images. And they also seem to claim that this model doesn't overfit. Overfitting is one of the risks that is associated with the use of AI in bioinformatics, which is what I already addressed. When you have a really small amount of data, this agent may be picking up on the biases that it found within that data. So maybe, for example, you are developing an artificial intelligence agent that learns to classify cats and dogs, and you have given it pictures of only black cats everywhere in your data set. So when you show it a picture of a white cat and ask whether it is a cat or not, this agent might be confused because it has never seen the image of a white cat before, and it has overfit on the idea of only black cats. So this is what the authors claim, that this artificial intelligence system that they have come up with doesn't actually overfit, and it is a performance improvement over all the state of the art systems that are existent, and they claim to have a 98.63% average accuracy. I would encourage you all to take a look at this paper if you have time. So, in the interest of time, I don't want to go into the actual details of how each and every one of these systems are executed. This is the actual algorithm of how the input is processed, what is the iterative process of this. So, if any of you are interested in the actual artificial intelligence, machine learning, Python implementation of this, we could take a look at this again at the end. Then there is a second paper. This one is something called MP score, where they have developed this immensely complicated data analysis pipeline, which looks at 179 RNA-seq and DNA methylation raw reads, and it comes up with the final score of how relevant, what is the probability that a certain person with a certain tumor is going to have a recurrent meningioma case or not. This is what this paper aims to achieve. And there are a lot of things that they are doing, both with methylation samples and with RNA-seq reads. And these are all data analysis techniques. I want to highlight over here that machine learning is very closely associated with data analysis, because almost all of the uh, goodness of how well your machine learning model or your artificial intelligence is reliable is based on the quality of the data that you give into it. And so all of the researchers who are working in this domain are completely focused on getting quality data and quantity data which is reliable and which is concordant with the observations that are made in other studies which are not AI based. So after the processing is done, they determine the score system, which is, and they test it on two validation data sets. So they are using this scoring system, which is based on stemness index, differentially expressed gene analysis, consensus clustering, which is basically their technique of classifying where each of these patients goes. So basically they have come up with this four system or this four class classification of meningioma tumors. So this column, this broad column is one class. This is a second class. This is a third class. And the fourth one of those meningeal cases where they really couldn't find any pattern that was associated with the other three. And they are classifying into these four clusters and then study scoring based on that, based on what cluster it is present in. That is one parameter. Then they have taken into consideration this random forest model. If you remember, I showed you the structure of a tree of how the heart risk is determined based on what age or weight or gender the patient is associated with. Something similar to that is being done over here based on the metadata. And they claim that this MP score is something that classifies the meningioma case based on um, okay. So they are claiming that they have this phenotypical classification based on this MP score, which is going to tell you how much recurrence is appearing in these meningioma cases. So this is a predictive and prognostic attempt using machine learning. And this is where I have demonstrated to you an application of the natural language processing techniques as well as the computer vision techniques in the previous paper. And in this paper, the general machine learning techniques like random forest methods. So these are being used every day by bioinformatics researchers. These are the references. If you have time, do take a look at these bioinformatics papers. And now I come to the scope, future, and limitations of what artificial intelligence really is. So, the scope of AI, what healthcare needs today is speed and efficiency, precision and accuracy, personalization, and how artificial and these questions which are there in healthcare are being answered by AI. So we have already seen that all those MRI images, all of those gigantic terabytes of DNA sequences, RNA sequences are being automatically analyzed by AI. That automation is saving us time. Then the precision and accuracy of AI, the 98.63% that I showed you of BTCNN, is coming from the pattern detection techniques that artificial intelligence is bringing to the table. And the personalization that we discussed in precision medicine is coming from the anomalies that artificial intelligence is observing in those mathematical numbers that may be coming from those differentially expressed gene quantities, or maybe coming from the gene counts that are coming from the analysis that those R or Python methods are coming up with towards the end. So that tailoring based on anomalies is also coming up from artificial intelligence. So the scope of AI in bioinformatics is really very open. We can go in any direction from here. There is no limitation in the existent framework of existing framework of bioinformatics that AI doesn't fit in. And the other thing is there may be applications in the field of bioinformatics which we really don't see. So we want to take a look at that also. What is the future? Early stage detections. I already showed you a paper of the prognostic value of this MP score system, which they are claiming that their neural network is going to detect whether the meningioma tumor might be a recurrent case or not. Then we saw that there are synthetic proteins, those protein structures can be predicted roughly using Google's DeepMind system. We are developing more and more advanced systems every day, and we are doing data crunching. And the only limitation really right now is computing power, which is the hardware that we have available to us. Because the more and more advanced systems we develop, the more and more sophisticated hardware systems we require to over to have as the underlying foundational base for these artificial intelligence system. So we are going to a future which is more predictive, more efficient, more automated, more based on the idea of synthetic and engineered genetic forms, which also incorporates crunching of data at unprecedented sizes. Now, the limitations, because somebody was asking, I have already talked about the quality concerns that we have. Another thing we have is the privacy concern. So, we take a very simple example of this chat GPT that everybody is using. The questions that you are asking chat GPT in the open net chat conversation that you're having with it are also being used partially for further feedback learning of this GPT system back in the OpenAI's hardware systems. So the data that you are giving it in the form of the questions and the prompts that you are asking are being used in the background by that system to enhance its decision making capabilities. Then ethics and regulations. So there are a lot of ethical implications. What are the fields in which artificial intelligence can be used? How much should we regulate this? Because there is some sensitive data that we don't want it to take a look at. And then again, over the past few years, been this very sad case of, I take a very specific example, that there are certain artificial intelligence image detection algorithms for facial recognition that are only detecting the faces accurately for those who are of Antipodean or Caucasian descent, and those who have African American or Asian genetics. These artificial intelligence agents are not really accurate. So this seems to be a very perplexing problem, and we cannot deploy such artificial intelligence models in public, right? So this might also come up with other genotypical observations that AI might do in the world of bioinformatics, and this is of concern to us. Then interpretability is also something that I have already discussed. And finally, yes, AI is this overhyped bubble. There are people who are talking about AI which is everywhere. There are news articles that are coming up which is saying that there have been people 1,000 years ago in Sumerian and Mesopotamian civilizations who have come up with this idea of artificial intelligence. So there are such whimsical and ridiculous claims that people are making even about the Indian knowledge systems and our ancient traditions. But we need to keep a very holistic view of what artificial intelligence really is, and that the underlying concept of it is just a mathematical function that takes in data or looks at a lot of data, tunes a certain number of parameters, and then is given as a black box in the form of, let's say, a web page or a hardware or a Google Colab system or the Python interface that you see on your computer. So that interfacing and the underlying mathematical formulation has to be separated. These are all the major limitations of AI that we see today. Now, before I come to the takeaways, I see two questions over here. So, books in which bioinformatics is described entirely. So far, I have never really taken a look at any book that is there on bioinformatics. How I myself came across all these concepts is because I was at that point of time studying the construction of a data analysis pipeline that I wanted to come up with based on another research paper for studying RNA sequencing data in meningioma. What I was doing was going through a huge number of research papers, essentially mining a lot of data which is freely available on NCBI. And I think this is also the advice that I would like to give the second person who is asking uh, on drug toxicity screening. So most usually the first place that you want to go and search for is research papers which are associated with what you want to take a look at. And because there are already so many AI tools, like I already went through previously in our talk, right? So um, there is this deep chem, atom-wise, benevolent AI. So all of these might be relevant in one way or another to your specific case. So if you are looking at drug toxicity, let's say you want to look at mice or rat, one of the things that you want to do is get the, so coming from a genomics point of view from my background, I will take, let's say, for example, the genome of that rat and then come back with those techniques and then come back with some form of structuring for that genome, or how, or the proteins which are developed from that genome. There are already analysis pipelines that exist which, based on the gene that you have for that rat, are going to give you that set of proteins or protein expression that you have for that specific rat genome. And then you can use these tools and compounds on something like deep chem or atom wise. But what is specific to your case might only be found relevantly, because there are so many tools out there, right? And so many things may be repurposed for so many things. So your first go-to thing should be to go to some page on NCBI or uh, Omics DI and these kind of open source databases, and take a look from there, and then come up with whatever procedure or data analysis pipeline you want to develop particular to your case. But the first step should always be to look at similarly done work. If similar work has not been done, then you need to separate the drug toxicity screening part of it and the genome or the gene study or whatever data processing part of it there is, and then look at papers which are associated with the drug toxicity side, and then you want to take a look at the data analysis side of papers which have done this kind of data analysis of toxicity related um, chemical compound finding, then bring it back to the problem of rats and put these things together and create your own data analysis pipeline. And yes, so there is not really a single book. You have to ultimately keep looking at, because this is a very developing field and the frontiers of what even bioinformatics really can be defined as is changing every day. It's not something that is fixed. So you want to take a look at that in that repurposed sense again. So if you want to take a look at what bioinformatics actually is, the first thing I will tell you is to maybe just go and ask ChatGPT itself, and it will give you a very edified form of what it means. And then from there, it will itself give you a bunch of suggestions of website. So if you want to just start off, what you want to do is maybe choose a tumor of your choice. Let's say this is what I would have done if I want to learn again. So there were people with me who were working on sclerosis, who were working on Parkinson's disease. All of us learned bioinformatics in the same way. We were just going to this disease of our choice, looking at the data analysis pipelines and the machine learning papers that have come up over the past few years on NCBI, on Omics DI, going through those papers. And whenever we were coming up with terms that we were not able to understand, we were going back and reading about those terms. Now, the machine learning side of these things, of where you can actually learn about the machine learning concepts that are discussed in this paper. For example, you might be interested in knowing what this neural network is, or what this what the mathematical function actually is, or what the back propagation method, which I said was being used to train this particular object over here, what the back propagation methods really are. Then you want to go from a purely software engineering point of view, and that is no longer a bioinformatics point of view. Most of the people who are sitting in the interdisciplinary field of bioinformatics are learning deep learning and machine learning separately as a Python endeavor. They are learning Python, they are learning the libraries associated with Python, and there are a lot of open source websites like freecodecamp.org and W3 schools that teach you what Python really is. There are a lot of YouTube videos. You can get started from there if you want to learn about how the actual code, how the actual underlying mathematical theory of this is. But if you are just interested in the biological output that comes from these things, then the best way for you to go about is to learn from these things, right? So where should you start to learn from regarding AI in general? So, uh, could you just clarify what you mean by AI in general? Do you want to understand what the utility of AI is, or um, do you want to understand the math that goes underneath? Do you want to understand how can you code your own AI agent? So, what do you mean by AI in general? Because all these three things are very different ways in which you want to start learning. If you want to learn about the mathematical formulations that are in AI, there is this book called the Deep Learning book. And that thing goes from a very basic mathematical structure and goes into great depth about what deep learning techniques are. If you just go to Google and type the Deep Learning book, you're going to find that book out. There are lot of websites out there that teach you about coding machine learning. So you can just go to YouTube and just type AI for dummies, coding artificial intelligence agents for dummies. And you are probably going to get a bunch of tutorials that will teach you, even if you have no knowledge of Python, they are going to teach you from the very scratch of how you can install Python, set it up, what every line of code means, how you can do something useful. If that is what you mean by AI in general, then that is one way to go about it. But in general, there is no single repository or resource knowledge where everything about artificial intelligence can be found. This is not really an unfortunate result, but this is more so because artificial intelligence has grown too much in size. There, there are a wide range of applications that it is very wrong for me to generalize AI or just reduce it to the field of bioinformatics. So even today, I would advise that if you are more interested in AI in general, you approach it from a point of view of Python, you approach it from a point of view of PyTorch, you go through YouTube, freecodecamp.org. There are a bunch of other learning websites and good people who talk about this on YouTube. If that is what you mean by AI in general, that is how you start learning AI in general. So are there any other questions? AI to predict gene function. So there are a lot of papers existing on this. Right now, I cannot immediately recall um, what kind of things come up. But this gene ontology resource, which I am showing on this slide, is in general the first place that you should go to if you are interested in finding out about predicting gene function. So go to that particular website and take a look at the research papers based on which they have come up with the data on their website. But yes, have knowledge in Python, but don't really know AI algorithms. So if you have knowledge of Python, you are already halfway there. You only have to go to a good website. There is no specific thing as सबसे अच्छा website एक है. When you go to Google and type on Google artificial intelligence for dummies, it is going to come up with some good recommendations. Even on YouTube, even on Google, in the form of articles. So there is this website called Analytics Vidya, which has a lot of simplified version of what machine learning is. So if you are a person who is coming from a non-machine learning background but have a knowledge of Python, then Analytics Vidya is one website that you can take a look at. There are a lot of things that they discuss on that website. You can start from there. So that is also one way to go about AI in general. So I see that there are no more questions. I will conclude with the takeaways of today's session. I'm sorry that it got overextended, but here we are. And so finally, here are the takeaways.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Someone has raised their hand in the chat.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I missed them. Could you please unmute them?
Participants, you may also unmute and ask your questions.
Uh, Sir, how to help AI in read research papers?
So you want to um, so let me see if I got your question right. You want to read a lot of you want to read a lot of research papers, and what do you want to get out of that? That really is my question to you.
Yes, sir.
So you want to summarize all of them, or
Yes,
okay, so
because a lot of them, because in this many of research paper more than 50 paper, 50 pages and
yes,
more than 100 pages. So how to take easily study of main source of the uh, material with the help of AI.
yes. So there are a few things over here. One thing that I already talked about is this website called Keystone Map, where they are doing something that is exactly this. They are taking a look at the articles and the publicly available data that you have on the internet, and they are giving insights based on that. But what you want specifically is something like summary generation. So a very simple thing that you can do is just open the paper that you have on Microsoft Edge as a browser, and it will have this other AI tool that I already talked about today, which you may have probably seen, called Copilot. If you just go to that Copilot window and if you type in it, there is this 50-page long paper. I want you to summarize it in such a way so that I can get XYZ points from it. So if you give it a good enough prompt, it is also going to give you a good enough summary which is suitable for that. So this is one way. Gemini and Copilot both are capable of doing this. There are other tools that are also adept at this. I think natural reader AI is something that orally reads out research papers. So that is one tool that I think in its premium version, they also summarize papers and then read it orally out for you. And there are a bunch of other websites, like I think SciSummary is one of those websites. There is another website called SciSummary, is SCISUMMARY, that summarizes single or multiple research papers and also lets you adjust the summary length. Then of course there is chat GPT, but that means you have to paste a part of the research paper also in that dialog box. You probably don't want to do that. Then there is another website called Scholarcy, which is SCHOLARCY. This is an AI powered summary generator that can condense and reduce complex research papers. Then there are other general purpose summary generators like Jasper AI and Smodin. These things are for generating summaries of websites and other general things. But if you are interested in paper summarization, then I think Resumer is RESOOMER, and SciSummary. These two are two very commonly, not commonly used tools, but two tools which might help you for that. I hope that answers your question. Is there a second?
Yes, thank you.
Um, are there any other
Uh,
questions? Yeah,
so
please go
thank
ahead.
you so much for sharing such valuable information. So as we've approached the end of time, so I'd like to request you to summarize the main takeaways.
All right. Yes, I will definitely. I will share the presentation with the team if it's needed, and you guys can definitely take a look at it from there. Okay, so I would
And the
just like to.
participants may also follow up with their questions with Sir later on by connecting through the Biopractify team.
Yes, so the main takeaway for this session is I have showed you so many tools. Some of you even asked questions about specific tools. So anyone can use AI. It is not just specific to the field of bioinformatics, but I've already showed you a bunch of open source tools which are available for use in the artificial intelligence world. So keep an eye on the new papers that are coming out and take a look at the tools that we saw today. This is the main takeaway from today's session for me. And artificial intelligence is becoming increasingly popular. As I already showed you, this is again an image from the Google Ngrams view. And if you see that the word bioinformatics, machine learning, artificial intelligence over the last 3 decades, all of these words have been appearing more and more often in the research papers and books that are being written. So what this percentage is showing is that in the year 2010, what is the percentage of times this particular word appears in the research papers and books which were published in that particular year. This is the meaning of this graph. And you can clearly see that there is a very sharp and steep increase. So we are inclined to think that yes, artificial intelligence and machine learning is seeing a big boom. It is very popular. Sabko karna hai, and everybody should enter this field. But the reality is that the problems that artificial intelligence is seeking to solve are much more relevant. That artificial intelligence and machine learning have skyrocketed in its popularity only over the past few years, but diagnosis and cancer in general have been pertinent problems for much longer than that, and they continue to remain much more pertinent problems. They are more significant, and this is because there are far more solution methods to um, these problems, or at least attempted solutions to these problems, than machine learning or artificial intelligence. So even though those things have increased in popularity, the popularity of the problem itself has been there for a really long time. So there is this very common thing that I tell people when I am introducing artificial intelligence to them कि चूहा मारने के लिए तोप नहीं लेकर जाते हैं. You don't kill a rat with a cannon. You use rat poison. So just because you have a powerful tool like artificial intelligence doesn't mean that you're going to take it to fight every problem that you see in life. It is only going to be used if the requirements of your problem, the difficulty of your problem meet that specific um, difficulty setting. And that is all from my side. I hope that the session was insightful for you. If you have any questions, you can mail the Biopractify team, or if you want, you can also directly correspond with me on my Gmail. So thanks a lot for the opportunity of talking with you all and presenting my perspectives. If you have any questions, you can stay behind. I'll be there for a few. I'll hang around for a few minutes.
So as we have come to the end of today's webinar, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Mr. Vijay Balsubramaniam sir for your insightful presentation on the scope of AI in bioinformatics and the case studies of meningioma and processing pipelines. Your expertise and real-life examples have greatly enhanced our understanding of how AI technologies are transforming the field of bioinformatics. We appreciate the time and effort you took to share your knowledge with us, sir, today, and we look forward to applying these insights in our own work. Thank you once again for your valuable contributions. And I would also like to thank the participants for joining us today, and we appreciate your time and interest. Thank you.